Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started here this morning. So thanks for joining us. Believe it or not, this is our first in-person event since March of 2020. So it feels pretty amazing to have everyone here with us today. And we're thrilled to be here at City Winery, so thank you for hosting us. It's great to see so many familiar faces. I'm Suzette Munley, the president of CCPA. And we'd like to give a big hello to those of you who are joining us virtually. We're thrilled to be able to provide both options for you today. And thank you to all of our members and guests who have continued to support CCPA through the pandemic. We very much appreciate that. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, CCPA is an intimate and diverse group of business owners, executives, and managers looking to build relationships and offer each other meaningful resources. We take pride in bringing you unparalleled access to speakers, decision makers, and leaders who are shaping Center City. We keep our members and guests informed about business challenges and opportunities in Philadelphia. So let's take a minute and touch on the benefits of becoming a member, sponsor, or collaborating with CCPA. We offer signature events where you get the inside scoop on development, sustainability, exceptional women leaders, and the city's movers and shakers. There are marketing opportunities available only to members and sponsors, enabling you to reach thousands of businesses and consumers. And you have access to speakers and panelists in a way that few organizations can deliver. The up-close, intimate, and personal experience of a CCPA event is like no other, and we're happy to be back in person. Reimagine employee benefits that are available through Penworth Financial Services, and you can take the lead with opportunities to build your network, grow your business, and be a CCPA ambassador. So if you'd like to join today, please use the QR code on the event program. And to mention a few of our upcoming events, the next Meet the Developers is December 7th. The next Women Changing the City is at Rivers Casino, again in person, and a great event for men as well. Our next Lunch with City Leaders is with Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw on October 28th. And you can find all the details and a full schedule of events on centercityproprietors.org. We are pleased to collaborate with and welcome members of the Building Industry Association, Building Owners and Managers Association, Crew Greater Philadelphia, and the General Building Contractors Association. I'd like to acknowledge our sustaining sponsor and our preferred benefits provider, Michael Craig of Penworth Financial Services. And we'd like to welcome our newest sponsor to this series, D2 Groups, and thank our continuing sponsors for their support, Domus Construction, Friedman LLP, GZA Geo Environmental, Obermeyer Rebman, ServPro of Germantown, and TD Bank. And now I'd like to welcome Damian Gee, Senior Vice President and Regional Vice President of the Greater Philadelphia Lending Group at TD Bank.
So today I was wondering, it's the first time we actually had a chance to actually come to an event, and I think the biggest challenge I tried to figure out if I was going to wear a tie or not. I'm glad I actually wore a tie. But on behalf of TD Bank, good morning and thank you all for attending today. Philly's expanding skyline and growing neighborhoods are crucial to the prosperous Philadelphia. TD Bank is proud to support CCPA and this event as it explores the successes and challenges in making this a reality. TD Bank is one of the top 10 largest banks, providing more than 9.5 million customers with a full range of retail, small business, and commercial products and services, with more than 1,200 locations Maine to Florida. During the pandemic, we prioritized supporting small business clients with PPP loans and providing hardship assistance options to business owners and consumers. In fact, TD Bank provided over 1,200 loans for about $886 million in Pennsylvania alone. In addition, to continue to support our continuing communities, we announced a $100 million equity fund to support minority-owned small businesses to ensure that they had resources they need to adapt and scale long-term. And of course, we remain committed to the growing local real estate holdings, including affordable housing projects, to invest in communities where we do business. And if you need any financing needs, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're glad to help. And again, now is my pleasure to introduce Center City Proprietors Treasurer and Event Sponsor, Suzanne Spinell-Schuster from Friedman LLP. Thank you.
Thank you, Damien. And hello to all of you here and to all of you out there. I am Suzanne Spinell-Schuster, Director in charge of Accounting Services at Friedman LLP and CCPA Board Treasurer. I am thrilled that Friedman is a sponsor of this event, and I look forward to hearing from all of our panelists. The real estate industry's propensity for rapid growth and change generates both new challenges and great rewards. Immersed in real estate for nearly a century, Friedman LLP has helped many of the nation's most prominent developers, operators, and investors gain operational and tax efficiency and to maximize the return on investment. Friedman's real estate professionals make up one of the region's largest and most respected teams, providing a full scope of accounting, audit, tax, and consulting services to multifamily, commercial, industrial, and affordable housing owners, developers, syndicators, lenders, and investors, property management companies, REITs, hotels, parking garages, and cooperatives and condominiums. Go to our website to learn more at friedmanllp.com. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's moderator. Since 2016, after serving on the organization's board for many years, Paul Steinke became Executive Director of the Preservation Alliance for Greater Philadelphia, a membership-based organization that promotes the appreciation, adaptive reuse, and development of the Philadelphia's region's historic buildings, communities, and landscapes. Paul has run for City Council, was the Executive Director of the University City District, and was a founding staff member of the Center City District. Most importantly, he has also served several years as a board member of Center City Proprietors. His full biography and those of our panelists are in the electronic program that we sent earlier. So please join me in welcoming Paul and our panelists.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Wow, it is amazing to see a room full of actual people. I'm not looking at all of you on a tiny little screen, so great to see you all in person in this beautiful space. I've never seen this before. Raise your hand if you, like me, have not ever seen this space before. Almost all of us. And welcome to everyone Zooming online. Next time, we hope you'll get out of bed and come downtown and join us in person. I highly recommend it. But seriously, welcome to all of you as well. So it's an honor to be asked to moderate today with such a distinguished panel as these folks you see before you. And I am going to kick it off with just a few remarks on what I've observed in the current real estate market. I'm a voracious consumer of real estate information and have been for many years. On the office front, we're all, of course, wondering what the world of office work is going to look like post-pandemic. And yes, oh, sure. Is that better? We're all wondering what the world of office work will look like post-pandemic, and there were two clues in the news just in the last week. GlaxoSmithKline at the Navy Yard has announced they're moving into a smaller footprint in University City. And if old timers like me will recall, they used to occupy a full office tower at 16th and Race, built just for them. And now they're just going to be a tenant on a few floors at the FMC building. And then Rite Aid moving in from Camp Hill to a remote first work environment at the Navy Yard. So the world is changing post-pandemic when it comes to office work, and of course, because of the impact of the internet. On the residential front, it seems like, especially on rental residential, it's all systems go, somewhat on condominiums too. We'll hear that from a few of our panelists here today. It seems like a booming market in the city and the suburbs. On the industrial front, one word, Amazon, the symbol of the new internet-based warehousing and distribution economy that's transforming the industrial landscape. Retail is in recovery mode, but what is the new normal with online shopping and with the challenges that brick and mortar retail have in today's environment? And finally, I should say something in my role at the Preservation Alliance about some terrific adaptive reuse projects in just the last few years. The Canopy Hotel in the former Stephen Gerrard building at 12th and Market. Bill is here and he'll probably address that. And one of my favorite recent adaptive reuse projects, the Tidewater, which is the former grain elevator at 20th and Callow Hill, a long-time white elephant on the skyline, which is now a residential conversion project by Altera Property Group. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to throw some questions to our panelists and get the conversation going, break the ice, and after a few of them, we're going to open it up to you, the audience, for your questions. So are you guys ready? We're
ready.
going to do introductions, and let's start with Mr. Dranoff on my right.
Okay.
Would you
Introductions?
Yes.
Carl Dranoff, president of Dranoff Properties. We've been developers of residential and mixed-use properties, large and small, historic and new construction, for about 40 or so years, starting in Old City and going all over the city, University City, Franklin Town, Center City, Avenue of the Arts, and our latest project is Art House at Broad and Spruce, which I'll talk about in a few moments.
Great. Sandra.
So good morning, and my name is Sandra Dungee Glenn. In November of 2019, my partners Taib Smith and Stephen Sanders and I brought together a group of experienced Black developers, real estate developers, and launched the Collective. And the Collective is our response to, despite some of the very good news that's been shared about the reality of real estate development in Philadelphia, that for many Black residents in Philadelphia, they still live in neighborhoods with undervalued housing and inadequate access to capital and declining home ownership. And so we've committed to supporting our 7 inaugural real estate development members through advocacy and also by raising $100 million in capital, mainly equity capital, to go into their projects. And they've committed, on the other hand, to continuing to build a track record of successful, financially successful projects, but also doing projects that have a real measurable benefit and bring assets to the existing residents instead of displacing them. And these developers are in all sectors, or pretty much all sectors of real estate, commercial, mixed use, rental, and home ownership here in Philadelphia. So we look to building out this network of raising capital and really helping them move into a much stronger position and have a stronger role in helping to determine the direction of real estate development here in Philadelphia.
Thank you. Let's move on to Brian.
Good morning, Brian Emmons. I'm with Southern Land Company. We are a developer and manager of mixed-use construction projects. Most recently, here in Philadelphia, we're building and developing a 48-story high-rise on Rittenhouse Square called The Laurel. It's 185 apartments and 65 condominiums and 45,000 square foot of retail. We also, 3 blocks from that, have recently broken ground on a new project at 1620 Sansom Street, where we'll be constructing a 28-story tower with 265 apartments and 30,000 square foot of retail. Thanks.
Good morning. I'm Bill McDowell. I'm with National Development. National Development is based in Philadelphia. We're a subsidiary of National Real Estate Advisors based in Washington, D.C., which manages the pension fund of the IBEW. And we have a large 4-acre, 1-block development 2 blocks away at East Market, which has been going on for about 10 years. It's a mixed-use project, including multifamily residential, retail, some converted office, and as Paul mentioned, the new 236-room Hilton Canopy Hotel. And under construction right now is a $750 million office building for ambulatory care center for Jefferson Health. That'll be the final phase of this now $1.2 billion project called East Market. And it's been amazing sort of living through this pandemic on this project, but we'll sort of talk about some of those elements later on. And we've got a couple of other things underway, including a 700-unit multifamily project at 2nd and Spring Garden that will break ground early next year. So lots of things going on.
Morning, everyone. Mo Rushdy, I'm the managing partner of the Riverwards Group. I'm also the treasurer of the Building Industry Association and the chairman of the Philadelphia Accelerator Fund. Riverwards Group is a company that was founded about 11 years ago, and it is focused on developing new markets in the neighborhoods. We're pushing the boundaries. We have built over 700 to 800 units. We're currently working on 396 units between 3 different jobs, and we have about 850 units in our pipeline for the future. We target our target buyer or tenant is a median income $55,000 to $80,000 a year buyer. So, Carl, we're not competing, neither with Brian. So, you know, we're there for the average Philadelphian to be able to afford a for-sale home, single-family home in that $1,500 to $1,800 a month range. Or if you're a tenant, you'll be able to pay somewhere between $1,200 to $1,500 a month for, let's say, an average of a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom unit. So again, that is made possible by us pushing the boundaries in areas that has never seen development, but which requires us building blocks at a time so that we can create a market and create a neighborhood in these kind of outlier neighborhoods.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And let's get started with the question that I think is on everyone's mind every single day. And I'll ask each of you to take this question. Let's start with Carl. How's the coronavirus and the pandemic affected your business, your projects? Have you had to curtail or change any of your design or strategy because of it?
How many hours do I have for a response? Right. We broke ground on Art House in June of 2019. Art House is 47 stories, 253 million, 108 condominiums, and retail on the ground floor. When things started to get bad in the winter of 2019, 2020, we didn't know, what the impact would be, and we were frankly just digging down. You have to dig down on a high-rise building before you go up to build your foundations. And when March of 2020 came along, we were just coming out of the ground. And when things shut down, I think everybody in our business thought that it was maybe a month delay, and we'd all get past it, and we'd all get better soon, and things were under control. And of course, that turned out not to be. But for us, in the business that we're all in, there's a bit of luck, and there's intelligence, there's drive, and there's luck. And I've always said many times, I'd rather be lucky than smart. And fortunately, the inspiration for Art House came from a recently completed project on the Schuylkill River Park at 25th and Locust, One Riverside. That was a high-rise building, 22 stories, very contemporary. And we developed that property basically with a park surrounding us. And people came from Center City, from the suburbs, and it had widespread appeal because of all the green and fresh air and open space. So when we conceived Art House, we realized there's not a park right across from the Kimmel Center at Broad and Spruce. So we decided to put the park in the building. And we designed a very slim, tall tower. We hired a world-renowned architectural firm, Cohn Peterson Fox. They're on the trophy A list of the architects of the world. We asked them to create something very, very special. And Gene Cohn, the architect, was brought up in Philadelphia and lived right around Broad Street, actually. And so he developed a great building for us. He designed it. And the slim tower enabled us to build a park at Broad and Spruce. We had 36,000 square feet of open space that we utilized to put a greenhouse in the building, the first commercial greenhouse in a high-rise building, fully operational in North America. Lots of lawn areas, workout areas, dog run, planting beds, and everything that you could ask for in a park. So long story short, we didn't have to change our design because what really came to the forefront in design circles was how do we get fresh air? How do we get lots of light? How do we have green space so that you don't have to be inside all the time and you can get fresh air at any time? So we were fortunate, we were lucky, we had the right building and the right location at the right time. However, there were some changes that we made as we looked at the use of some of the spaces. We realized that everything was getting delivered, and we enlarged our holding areas and put in huge refrigerated spaces so that people could stock up for weeks at a time if they wanted to. We took one of our amenity areas. We have a 25-meter pool, 75 feet, indoor and a spa. And we also have a massage area as part of that, as part of our spa facility. And we decided to change the massage room into a beauty salon so that people, residents of the building, could bring in their own hairstylists. And that was an inspiration from Mrs. Dranoff. But it's a unique amenity for a high-rise building. We also put in touchless points for doors, for cleanliness. The biggest thing that we did, but it was designed into the building, is we have enormous balconies, which really are an extension of your living room or your bedroom. So there's lots of open air. So we made provisions in our design for the use of the building and turned our attention to construction because we were starting to lose workers in 2020. And we actually were fortunate to have a large garage facility right down the street at Broad and Pine, and we turned that into our processing center for workers. And we had, at peak, about 250 workers a day showing up at our site to build it. And we had to keep them healthy. We had to have restrictions, masking, testing, and everybody on the site that was working there got a special badge to get on the site, and it was closely monitored. We did lose workers along the way who had to quarantine. On a drywall crew, if you lose one person, you lose the whole crew. So it's a domino effect. That's why we had to be so careful. That labor shortage has morphed into a supply chain shortage, and I'm sure everybody can speak to that right now on this panel, but we're having a difficult time getting certain supplies, not everything, but we will finish the building on time in spring of 2020. Our first move-ins will be in April, and we look forward to being a icon on the Avenue of the Arts. The Kimmel Center and all the theaters have opened up. There's lots of activity. People are coming back into town. They're enjoying Center City now, and we feel like the best is ahead of us.
All right, well, thank you. Sandy, how about you? How is the pandemic affecting your organization and your business?
Well, I think I need to talk about the confluence of two events in terms of the impact on our initiative, the collective, the pandemic being one, and then the racial justice reckonings that happened in the summer of 2020. And while both of them took a tremendous toll on us personally, socially, emotionally, and for our developers financially, they ended up being a benefit to the launching of the collective. For one thing, the pandemic and the murder of George Floyd really brought into focus the still ugly truth about systemic and institutional racism across the country. And it became really a national issue. The pandemic, of course, uncovering the health disparities. You talked about essential workers. We saw real disparities in terms of really thinking about the overrepresentation of Black and brown folks in still the dirtiest and the lowest paying jobs, and kind of what that meant. The digital divide that was raised because of our young people, children now being home and virtual school, and that really uncovered the issues of the digital divide. And there was a lot of conversation about the racial wealth gap. And all of that created a climate where people were looking for answers. All right, now we know about this, what are we going to do about it? And that really was an opportunity for the collective. So both in the public sector and in the private sector, folks were now waking up to the problem and looking for now what is the response. And so the collective in our work around this idea of using real estate as a means to get at some of these social issues and social justice issues, a more equitable approach to neighborhoods, bringing wealth and increasing ownership, whether that's home ownership or business ownership. And so our strategy of working with these developers and having them now with a pipeline, over $300 million in projects in their pipeline, there were more people, I think, who were willing to look at various ways to support them. We heard a member from TD Bank talk about their new fund, and this was happening all over the country. So the question is now, with those commitments, turning them into reality. And so I think that's the work that we have before us. So I would say that the pandemic turned out to be a real catalyst for the launching of the collective and some of the growth we are enjoying now in terms of moving this agenda.
Kind of accelerated your agenda in some ways and put it more in the front of
On the front burner.
minds. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's move then to Brian from Southern Land, who, like Carl, has a new condominium building coming out of the ground that is sort of the signature project in the Rittenhouse Square neighborhood.
Yeah, so I don't want to rehash everything that Carl said, because we had experienced, all of the same issues. Getting 300 people inside of a tower healthy and keeping them safe is was one of our biggest challenges. Not to mention like the drywall crew that Carl mentioned, but when that guy's at home and he's got a sick child, all of a sudden he's quarantining and can't come to work. So there was a lot of other challenges. Along with what Sandra was saying, also with the social unrest, last year Philadelphia saw, a mass exodus for most of core center city. People that have the ability to choose where to live and can live anywhere, decided, by and large, not to live in the center of Philadelphia during, a pandemic and, extensive social unrest. So, Philadelphia lost a lot of residents temporarily during that time. As such, a lot of the restaurants and shops that we all became, familiar with and love to enjoy, either temporarily closed, adjusted how they operate their business. They, a lot of them didn't make it through the pandemic. The ones that did make it were able to adapt. So I think in the city, we saw a lot of people figuring out how to survive. And, for a lot of businesses, that's what it was. And for projects like Carl's and I, when you've got 35,000 square foot of retail and, you've got to lease that space, and all of a sudden every tenant that you thought you were going to have is not looking to expand. They're just trying to figure out how to survive. It brings you to a pause where, luckily for us, our spaces are going to be brand new Class A quality space. Once people get back to expansion mode, we're going to be well positioned. At the Laurel, we were very fortunate. 3 years ago, we signed a lease with Equinox Fitness Center For those that don't know Equinox, it's, one of the best national fitness brands in the country. We've got 35,000 square foot of Equinox. Just last month, we announced that Michael Schulson is going to be leasing our restaurant space. The head baker from Park that everybody loves, you can't go to Park and not eat their bread. The head baker's left Stephen Starr partnering with Schulson to bring a farm and table concept to Rittenhouse Square that doesn't exist, which we're really excited about. So how did we adjust during the pandemic? Like everybody else, we figured out how to survive. We have a very well capitalized project. We didn't even go to the debt market until we were 25% sold. So we were, financially in a position that we could just hunker down and survive. I'd be lying if I told you that like last year, like everybody was beating on our door saying, I want to buy a $3 million condo on Rittenhouse Square. But, we have waterfront property in Philadelphia. If you can be anywhere and you want to be, most people would say they want to be on Rittenhouse Square. And, our biggest amenity is the park itself right out front. So, we've got two pools, an indoor pool, an outdoor pool. We've got conference space. We got office spaces. Every single one of our apartments has got, flexible space for those that want to work at home. But, we've been spending the majority of our time trying to help all of the colleagues around us figure out how to survive. We know that we're going to be there and, we're delivering our project next year. But at the end of the day, if we can't get everybody else in this room, the flower shops, the restaurants, the bars, the boutiques, if we can't figure out how to get them to survive, then, living in the city is going to be a challenge that, people want to live in the city for access to all of those great things. So, the one thing I'd like everybody in this room to figure out is like how we can, move forward on this. We've got to get Comcast back in the tower. We've got to get 8,000 people back in the offices. And, those are the people that are going to, eat at the little restaurants and go to the dry cleaner. So, while we've gotten to this part, I think we still have a lot of things to figure out. And, I'm anxious to see collectively how we can move forward.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that none of us had a pandemic in our 5-year strategic plans. So we're all kind of figuring it out as we go. I also want to give a shout out to the Laurel Project and Brian's work, because on Sansom Street, he's building this 45-story condominium tower on Walnut, but behind on Sansom, they also own a pair of turn of the last century buildings that they're restoring, one of which will be 30 apartments for tenants with 60% AMI. So the Laurel has a pretty significant affordable housing component as well, a block from Rittenhouse Square, which is pretty amazing in this day and age, I guess, to some of the issues that Sandy was talking about as well. So let's move on to Bill and his work at National Real Estate and what I still call Girard Square, 11th, 12th Market to Chestnut. How has the pandemic affected your work?
Well, it was actually a pretty scary time. I mean, I had just completed a $100 million renovation of the Stephen Girard building, our team, 236 hotel rooms, 100 staff hired, ready to open on April 1st of 2020. And on March 17th, we pulled the plug and said, it's not going to open. We actually paid staff for the next 6 months until we knew that it just wasn't going to open for at least a year. Iron Hill went dark. 2 floors of WeWork that we just completed went vacant, unoccupied. So it was a pretty scary time. Our occupancy rates on 550 apartments went from 95% to 82%. So we were pretty worried about what might happen. But I think the good thing about a mixed use project is you have certain uses that do well and that can cover the downswing of the uses that don't do well. Occupancy started to come back once people felt comfortable coming back into the city, and certain precautions and operating measures were were taken. So we began to stabilize. And, obviously with the Jefferson Health Project, which was, somewhat immune to the financial effects of the pandemic, it had already been financed, and that was a project that was going forward. So we cobbled it together, and everything is going along smoothly right now. The hotel is open, thanks to a convenient relationship with a lender. We're able to modify the debt structure so that we can, survive on that. The retail is still a problem, but for Wawa always does well. But the rest of the retail is still a struggle, and we're just not quite sure who's going to come back, how they're going to come back, what it's going to look like. This is already sort of extended far beyond what we thought. People are not coming in droves to eat indoors. So those places with outdoor facilities are still doing well. But I think the question sort of begs is, what did you learn from the pandemic, and how is that going to affect what you're going to do in the future? And I think that's still out. I think one of the things, we have 175,000 square feet of office space, which is about, it's fully leased, so financially it's okay, but it's only about 30% occupied. So, all the things that Brian were talking about, all those people that have those services and needs, that filter out into the community, that's not happening. Those workers aren't back. The virtual reality of it. And so it begs the question, what's going to happen is, especially when those leases start to run, now you hear about a lot of the law firms that are resizing. And so I think there's some potentially, monumental shifts in the office market that we'll see in Center City, and obviously I think you hear about a lot of the reuse plans, whether it be for life science or residential or whatever. But there's a bit of a scramble going on right now as to what's going to happen with office space. And then I think that there is a lot of theories about what's going to happen in the residential space. Are people going to live differently? Do they want different things in their apartments? You still have the formula that you have to beat, which is, there is a rent ceiling in Philadelphia, and there is a construction market, and those construction costs are still rising higher than the rents. It's just hard to make that work. So that idea of expanding apartments so that they can be sort of work at home places is not penciling yet on a pro forma. So that jury is still out. We're going forward with an apartment with a very traditional mix of apartments that looks very similar to a pre-pandemic mix, with the size of the apartments sort of remaining the same. We may have features in those apartments that enable work at home possibilities. And I think a lot of that just has to do with built-ins, but we're not sort of changing the overall mix or the overall size of the apartments, partly because we just can't. It doesn't pencil yet. But so there's a lot of things that people are thinking about. I think though the most troublesome fact of what we're facing right now is that the lack of office workers that are coming back into the city that are feeding so many other components of Center City businesses, which need to survive.
And I think, and would you agree that, you said only 30% of the workers are in those offices? Well, when those leases expire, that's when we're really going to feel it.
Yep.
Like we're having a delayed impact because the leases are still there, the tenants are still mostly paying their rent. But when those leases expire, then what happens to these buildings and the landlords?
Yeah, look at Wanamaker, look at some of the other, there are people that are looking at major conversions of former commercial office buildings.
In the residential, another thing, life science, yeah. Well, Mo, how about you? The pandemic and its effect on your business and your outlook.
Let me start with the bad news. So operationally, our schedules were extended by probably 40% in terms of scheduling part, in terms of construction time. Our schedules had to be adjusted to overcome the supply chain issues that Carl was talking about. We used to get cabinets in 2 weeks. Now it takes us about 16 weeks to get cabinets. So you had to reshuffle all of the scheduling to try to minimize the effect of the supply chain issues that we're going through. And I don't think we're going to have a resolution to the supply chain issues for at least a year ahead. There's such a big backlog and a labor shortage that is fueling this, and it will continue for a while. On the design end, we do a lot of single-family home, for-sale homes, and we typically loved, if we had an extra space, we always would love to call it a fourth bedroom, let's say, or a third bedroom. Now that has changed, and now we're calling these offices, and designing new projects. We're putting in a small office component to these single-family homes because we realize that even though we all want people to go back to the offices, but on the long term, I think you're going to have a threshold and a work from home component that we need to adapt to. It might be 20% of the workforce, might be 10%. We don't know yet. We'll know that maybe in a year from now. But that has been adjusted in our designs. Financially, lenders have changed their lending practices and terms on a lot of these projects. I mean, we were about to close a loan in March of 2020, which had parameters of, at 20%, 1.2 debt coverage ratio, and a 70% loan to value, and a 65% loan or 80% loan to cost. And that changed. We got a call that the banks are changing now their lending guidelines to more of a 1.25 debt coverage ratio. So now your net operating income has to perform at 25% more, from 0.2 to 0.25. That's a 25% more increase in your net operating income. Couple that with an expiring tax abatement, right? That's the kind of pressure that the deals that we're seeing are the ones that, or the pandemic has kind of exaggerated. The equity requirements have been increased, for us at least. A lot of these neighborhood deals have been increased to about 35% of total cost, from sometimes 25%, sometimes 30%. So that's a 5 to 10% increase in equity requirements. So we're talking about a job that's, let's say, $50 million. We're talking about an increase that might range from $2.5 to $5 million in increase in an equity requirement, which puts stress on the deals. Now, that is the new norm. These are the new underwriting guidelines, which forced us to adjust designs to create more units in the same building, smaller units, so you can get a higher rent per square foot that can adjust for these or can compensate for these adjusting guidelines. Now, on the good side, on the bright side, we were able to go back on land deals, especially in these far outlier neighborhoods where, a lot of it is owned by, generations of, first comers to these neighborhoods who don't have to sell. And with a lot of the land costs going up pre-pandemic, it was becoming more and more tough to sign on new land deals. Now, with the pandemic happening and the expiring tax abatement, that allowed us to go back and, renegotiate a lot of these deals that were denied or did not pencil out for the sellers, and we were able to negotiate and sign a couple of deals for 400 units for our pipeline. So that's kind of the silver lining that we found on the pandemic side. I think there's a lot of that stuff that's going to be reversed when you talk about supply chain, scheduling, durations, all that is going to go back. Maybe it's going to take a year, maybe it's going to be 2 years. When it comes to the lenders, guidelines, and changes in design, I think some of these changes are going to be permanent, and it's going to be the new norm that we have to adjust these deals to accomplish.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you all for your answers to that question. Let's bring it back to Sandy with a question about social and economic justice in the real estate industry. What are the actions underway in the real estate community that you see that are trying to address those issues? And how are those issues surrounding social and economic equity tied to real estate development in your view?
So Paul, I have it's going to be kind of a multi-layered answer to your question, because I think there are a few different perspectives that we need to look at this whole issue of equity from. One of the perspectives that I don't think we pay enough attention to is really kind of the historical context for when we talk about neighborhoods that are challenged in terms of investments. We talk about communities where residents have been displaced. We talk about disparities in access to capital, let's say for business or business growth. When we look at the history here, and particularly around real estate in this country, I think we have to acknowledge that there have been some very deliberate policies that have caused what we now consider the racial wealth gap. One of them being going back to the 1930s and housing policy and FHA. For example, it was, if you wanted an FHA-backed mortgage, you could not make a loan to Black families. It literally could not. You were not allowed, you would not get that as a lender. You would not have any FHA-backed mortgages. So when we think about the issues of home ownership now, and if home ownership is still the best route, and for most Americans, their route to having wealth and intergenerational wealth, think about what that shut off for Black citizens for generations. And so that has the implications of that still live on here in Philadelphia, where I think there was a study done a few years ago that said for Black applicants were still 2.7 times more likely to be rejected in terms of having access to conventional mortgages than white applicants. So I think, so that history. There's another piece when we look at urban renewal. You know, I live adjacent to University City, and I think it has had many benefits to Philadelphia. But the genesis for University City was the displacement of probably up to 10,000 residents from what used to be called the Black Bottom, a stable Black neighborhood that doesn't exist anymore. And we know some of the challenges going on in Mantua and those neighborhoods. You think about the Roosevelt Expressway and the construction of the federal highway program. In Philadelphia, the neighborhood of Nicetown, 300 homes were demolished to make room for the Roosevelt Expressway, and Nicetown never recovered. So that historical basis for issues that now call out for a response and a repair, I think has some genesis in our public policies. And so I think there needs to be some response from our public sector to addressing that. So I think that's one layer we need to look at. I think there are economic implications. There's a 26-point gap between the rate of home ownership for Black Philadelphians compared to white Philadelphians. There is, we have a city that is about 38% in terms of a Black population, 12% of our population nationally are people of African-American descent. And yet in the real estate industry, we have about 4.4% of the commercial real estate professionals who are Black. And so the idea of building and needing to build a pipeline of professionals entering into this sector, I think is very real, because they are Black businesses. They as real estate developers, they're hiring contractors, they're hiring architects, they're hiring lawyers and accountants. Many of them are also Black businesses and that therefore has a multiplier effect. So the idea of, and our ability to have those diverse developers benefit from what you've talked about as the growth in commercial sectors like life sciences, where they're talking about adding 200 million square feet of lab space and research space. What share of that kind of growth will be seen among diverse developers? Same in the home ownership arena. And then finally, you talk about linking it to social determinants of health. What does this mean in terms of poverty and violence and so forth? There was an article recently by the Inquirer that looked at, I think, the 57 blocks where you had the greatest concentration of gun violence. And in those blocks, you had 2 times the city average for around poverty. You had 3 times the city average for vacant housing. And the life expectancy in those neighborhoods was 3 years less than the state average. And those neighborhoods also, most of them had also been targets of redlining. So there is a very real connection between health determinants, quality of life, and real estate development. And so from the collective perspective, we believe we have to be much more intentional, and developers seeing themselves as, in some ways, almost public health advocates and professionals, because what you do in that space has a big impact on the quality of life of the residents in that community. And so doing projects that, again, that have a financial return, but also are beneficial as it relates to health and wealth and wellness. And so for the neighborhoods where our developers are working, which are the Tiogas, the King Sessings, the Haddingtons, the Germantowns, kind of core residential communities, really seeing that development through the lens of a typical resident, which may be a 40-year-old woman of color. What type of development is going to enhance her quality of life? What does that housing look like that is affordable and it is safe, it is energy efficient, it has access to good schools and transportation, access to the basic amenities like quality food sources. If we put that lens on development and really thought of it more holistically, that's what I think is really a response to what equitable development looks like. And so that's the lens that we're looking at it through for the collective. And we want to encourage developers who are taking that kind of perspective. And so our developers are looking at projects like that. I invite folks to visit our website, thecollectivephl.com, to get some examples of the kinds of developments that they are undertaking, where they're dealing with food deserts and access to healthcare, aging in place, as part of a response to place-based development. And again, these are financially attractive projects, but they also have real benefit to the community residents. And I think that has to be part of has to be a more consistent part of our approach to development in Philadelphia.
Okay, thanks. Any of the panelists? CollectivePHL.com, right?
CollectivePHL.com.
Any of the panelists want to pick up on any of the points that Sandy made?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to talk from the lens of the Building Industry Association. So one of the things that we have to recognize as an industry is in today's world, there are 2 things that are driving housing policy, or there's one main thing that's driving housing policy, and that is affordable housing. I do agree with Sandra that there has been disparities in lending and opportunities for Black and brown home ownership in the city. A lot of the development has been geared towards middle and upper class. And that's a fact, that's a reality. Today, we are short 30,000 affordable homes cited by the City Housing Action Plan by 2028. So there's 2 ways to think about this. So as a BIA, we looked at this with a very balanced approach. We acknowledge that the issue is there. And acknowledging the issue is not enough. We have to bring solutions that actually work. Solutions that don't work is one of the issues that is facing our city today. There are solutions for the affordable home issues. There is solutions for bringing in more Black and brown participation to the workforce in the city of Philadelphia in our industry. So I'm going to talk about two programs. First, there's the minority participation program, or the minority partnership program that was released by PHDC, that we have worked hand in hand with PHDC to leverage a portion of public land that's owned by the city by creating memberships, creating partnerships, 3 different tiers of partnerships between developers that are existing developers in the city that have access to capital, and creating partnerships with Black and brown developers. The BIA is going to be part of the mentorship part and the partnership side when it comes to the existing developers. But we have to also find solutions that can get us to where Sandra is saying fast. The city owns a lot of public land, and part of our policy and part of what we're pushing for as a BIA through its affordable housing blueprint is this city has 6,500 lots that are sitting vacant that we can build 20,000 affordable homes on. The city of Philadelphia can get control of another 10,000 lots through $25 to $30 million payment to US Bank on that historic deal that was done back in the 90s on the US Bank lien issues, which is holding back 10,000 lots for the city, that where we can develop another 30 to 40,000 affordable homes. There has to be practical solutions that work. And while I agree with everything that Sandra said, it is now the time that we as developers, and BIA is taking a very leading role here with council, with the administration, with different organizations, to actually come up with legislation that works, right? So we have to recognize the issue. And that, I think that most developers recognize that if we don't come up with solutions that actually work, and I'm not going to talk about the solutions yet because that's going to come up later, but if we don't come up with solutions now, we are going to find a lot of legislation that is going to be coming, that can be adverse to a lot of people in this room, and is going to slow down production and development in the city, whether commercially, whether residentially, and it's going to, again, with the expiring tax abatement, is going to really stop development in the city. So recognizing the issue and providing workable solutions, and then getting the public-private partnerships that can actually work. One last thing I wanted to add here is the Accelerator Fund. Accelerator Fund is a fund that I chair along with some people from City Council, some people from lending institutions, and it's a $100 million fund that is geared towards 5 different financial products: acquisition loans, mezz loans, pre-construction loans for Black and brown businesses that are looking to build projects with a 51% affordability component. It is there for Black and brown individuals or companies that are looking to or need pre-construction costs. I do agree with Sandra, there is lack of capital, and a lot of these funds are coming up and are very important to and be part of the solution. And when we say the word, or when we say $100 million, it sounds like a lot of money, but it's a drop in the bucket. It's a drop in the bucket. 6,500 lots is about $3 to $5 billion worth of resources that this city has that can be leveraged, right, to advance a lot of the issues that we are talking about And we just need to find the right mix and balance of legislation and the right leadership and the right science and math that goes behind getting these solutions to actually be done.
Well, Mo is really anticipating what my next question is going to be about legislation and policy, but it sounds like you're also saying the city holds the key to the solution because of the available real estate that it controls or can control. But I also want to make a point, it was in the news over the summer, a University of Pennsylvania study came out with respect to the Restore, Repair, and Renew program of the city. How many of you have heard of that? It's a city program, not very well known, that gives grants and loans to existing homeowners to fix their houses. It's income limited. And what the Penn study showed was that for blocks where at least one house was the recipient of the Restore, Repair, Renew program investment, crime on those blocks was 22% lower than in the rest of the city. So, you know, it's new construction, it's keeping people in their homes who are struggling, are two solutions to the affordable housing crisis. Sandy?
Just real quickly, Paul, I also just wanted to, and I agree with what Mo said about leveraging, the importance of leveraging public and private dollars, but also expanding when we think about affordable housing, I think there's a tendency to think about just very low income housing or housing for people with low incomes. That's important, but as we're seeing now in Philadelphia, working people are being priced out of their homes. Teachers and our SEPTA employees and folks who are the essential service providers. And so affordability, I think, has to be expanded to think about whether you workforce housing, being able to move from rental into a home. And so getting housing that's kind of at that threshold of $150,000, maybe, you know, but less than $250,000, $300,000 for a starter home. So how do we think about expanding the supports for affordable housing across a broader spectrum and not just very low income housing? I think that's one of the other challenges we need to think about.
Yes, sure, yeah. Well, let's pivot into the legislation and policy topic, and I'm going to throw it to Brian because in the prep session for this, Brian had some thoughts on this. So Brian, what's your take on the current legislative and policy environment in the city? And then we can throw it open to the rest of the panel. This is going to take some time.
I don't know if it's going to take any time. I mean, to me, the solution's very obvious. And unfortunately, we can't get our politicians to agree. 6 years ago, when I was president of the Building Industry Association, Philadelphia was deemed somewhat affordable. There were still a lot of conversations about we need more affordable housing, we need more affordable housing. And we 100% do. The problem that we have is we have too many politicians vying for the next office, and they're not doing their jobs. In the last 6 years, we have done nothing but see legislation come out of city council that makes housing less affordable in Philadelphia. You cannot say you're a proponent of more affordable housing and then turn around and downzone your entire district. That right there is the kiss of death. If you want more supply, and more supply will actually mean, you know, the prices coming down. If you want more supply, then you have to make it easier to develop. You know, in the past 12 to 18 months, we've seen downzoning. We've seen districts come in and increase the parking requirements. You know, the city zoning code requires 0.3 in most districts. If you come in and you say you've got to have 1 to 2 parking spaces for every home, guess what? That made affordable housing less affordable. You can't come in and say that we're going to make it more restrictive on height. What it comes down to is, you know, we've got everybody, you know, listening to their constituents who say, I want more housing, I need more affordable housing, but they want affordable housing that looks exactly like the housing that they live in. In order for us to get the workforce housing and for Philadelphia to thrive, we need it to be great for everybody. Philadelphia needs to be a city where it doesn't matter if you're, you know, the school janitor, or if you're picking up trash, or if you're a truck driver, or you're the person that's like working at a fast food restaurant. We need housing for everyone. And not all that housing is going to be brand new, but the cycle is when you build new housing and people move out of an existing house, that house is going to be backfilled by somebody else. And until we recognize and we say, in order to provide more housing, we need to take all of the public land that we have out there available. We need to put restrictions on it so that the people that have been pigeonholed for centuries or for decades, we have to give them an opportunity to put that in action. But it's the control factor. And until the people in this room pick up their telephone and pick up their, email their friends and say, enough is enough, we need to make sure that the people that are living in the areas that have higher poverty rates, we need to get those folks jobs. We need to make sure that they have a quality education. We need to make sure that they're safe at home. When all the crime that we've seen in the last 12 months has just exacerbated the problem, we've got more murders and more gun violence right now than we've ever had. How do we fix that? You've got to look at what's going on. You got to look at our leaders in place and say, you know what, instead of vying for the next job, let's look at term limits. Because when you can be a city council person for 20 or 30 years and you can just keep doing the same thing, you don't have to make the tough decisions. You have to make the tough decisions that's better for Philadelphia in the long term, not what's best for you to get elected in the next term. So those are the things that, at the end of the day, you can't say that you want more affordable housing and then turn around and introduce legislation that does exactly the opposite. And that's what we have right now out of 3/4 of our city council.
Brian, that's well said. There's also councilmanic privilege, which means there's a patchwork of zoning throughout the city, different densities, different rules. It's very inconsistent, and term limits play into that because if someone's been a council person for 30 years, they're basically like the aldermen used to be in Chicago. They're kingmakers, and you can have 9 different policies in the 9 councilmanic districts. California just passed a statewide referendum enabling density on single-family lots where you can build, you can basically build another floor or have a duplex. And the whole idea was to create more affordability for working families, where your grandmom, where you can have intergenerational housing. There's a lot of great practices out there. I will say, as the gray-haired guy here with the bald spot that's been around for 40 years in Philadelphia and seen cycles, we have a great city. We really do. But we haven't had great leadership, and we're not using the best practices that are out there. So thank God everyone's working on a better solution, and we have to just stop kicking ourselves in the foot. I was sorry to see tax abatement go because I think it stimulated a lot of workforce housing. The biggest user of it was the Philadelphia Housing Authority. People don't know that.
And people with lower incomes are the ones that took advantage of it. And I wanted to put, I'm a numbers guy, so I'm going to put kind of numbers on what was just said now, right? For us to develop in the neighborhoods, right? The reason why we were able to develop in the neighborhoods is that you found cheap land. I mean, this is a city with New York costs and Baltimore rents, right? That's the saying. And for it to work, you either have to be building in Center City, right? On Rittenhouse Square. I love the project. Or if you're gonna go out in the neighborhoods, you're gonna have to get this land for nearly nothing, right? So that you can have the math work. I'm gonna give you just a simple example. A 220 unit job that has a cost of $55 million. That's $240,000 per unit. Equity requirement is about $70,000 per unit, 15 million. So the loan is for $40 million. The difference between the revenues coming in, which is only a $2.10 a square foot market, if you're talking about north of Lehigh, you're going into these new neighborhoods that you're going to be serving $1,200, $1,300 rents. The difference between that revenue that you have and that mortgage payment that you have on that $40 million, even at 4% interest rate,
30 years out, is only just gets you a 1.25 debt coverage ratio with a full 10-year tax abatement, because the operation costs are reduced by the tax, paying taxes only on the land. Okay, so now you have a new tax abatement, and that is, let's say it's a 5.5-year equivalent of the old tax abatement, which drags down the operating, or increases the operating expenses, and makes the difference of that, let's say on this job, $900,000 that created that 0.25 debt coverage, it takes it down to $600,000 of net operating income on that $15 million in equity. We're down now to 4% cash on cash, and a debt coverage ratio that does not work. Here's an example of what the 10-year tax abatement did for these projects in the city. Now, let's talk about new legislation. All right, we're going to adjust. We're going to increase unit counts and decrease sizes and go and fight in the neighborhoods and being called names for putting in 400, 500 units on a 3-acre property. Then you get legislation that is called inclusionary zoning that says, you know what? We want you to do 20% of these homes at 40% AMI. So now in these outlier neighborhoods where you're barely renting at $1,400, $1,500, you're asked to subsidize every unit for $1,000 a month. On a 220 unit job, that's 44 units subsidizing $1,000 a month. So you're talking about a year, 500,000. Cap it at 6. That's a subsidy of $5, $6, $7 million bucks, right? On a job that is in the neighborhoods. It doesn't work. The job doesn't work. So I'm just gonna, second what Brian says. We have legislations that are coming up, have been coming up, and we're gonna see them in election season for the next coming year, that basically are paper legislations, income paper. And I've said it to many people on city council. These will result in no affordable units and will result in jobs being stopped. Union jobs, non-union jobs, all jobs, black jobs. Right.
And prices of housing skyrocketing because
Right.
we've limited supply.
Right. So legislation that is not driven by science and math in our industry is failed legislation, right? It's legislation that is not going to work. Now, it's going to work on getting people elected because it works, right? If I say, as a council person, I have passed a 20% inclusionary zoning in my neighborhood, right? What do you think the reaction is going to be from the neighborhood? That's great. That's perfect, right? And it will get you elected. The hard decisions of actually sitting down and trying to figure out a solution that actually works is the hard part. And that's why we as a BIA, as companies, as developers, have recognized the balanced approach and said, we will solve the affordable home issue. We have the solutions. We have already banks that are signed up. We have, as a membership, over 1,000 units in applications to the land bank to build affordable homes. That is not moving. Why? We can ask the politicians why. The bottom line is, if you're serious as a city in resolving and getting legislation that is going to get this market, especially the residential market, which is the driving engine, residential development is the driving engine behind commercial corridors, behind getting lower income people finding new housing that's affordable, you have to have a serious conversation about public land and what's happening with public land. You will not get 2,000 affordable homes units a year from inclusionary zoning. It does not work in markets like Philadelphia. And that is why we're very strongly vocal about this and saying all these legislations, we can come back in 2 years and see how much it actually resulted in terms of affordable housing. The answer is going to be probably nothing, zero. Now, I want to mention one last thing.
Mo, can I ask one question?
Sure.
the land bank, isn't the land bank controlled by the city council person in that lands district?
That's a great question. So 2 years ago, and Carl, you got to hear this one because that's a good one. 2 years ago, a legislation that
And then
is.
when you're finished with this thought, we're going to have to go to audience questions.
Sure.
I'll see you now.
So there is.
And you'll be last.
So there is one main legislation that is just as strong as the 10-year tax abatement that passed 2 years ago, that probably no one in this room knows about, right? Passed 2 years ago. And that is each one of us in this room, outside this room, individuals, companies, have the right to go to the land bank, apply for a piece of land, and if it's available and you are qualified, and qualified means you can build it through a GC or yourself, and you have a term sheet from a bank that shows that you can build this home or homes, the land bank has an obligation to non-competitively assign that land to you. That legislation passed unanimously 2 years ago so that it resolves the affordable home issue, and that you would have an affordable home kind of what do we call it, a stimulus, right? Everyone can go build affordable homes. Actually, not 100% affordable homes, 51% affordable homes. So you are allowed to go and apply for 10 pieces of land, of which 6 are affordable, which you'll break even on, and 4 that are market rate on land at nominal values. What does this do? A lot of economic activity, affordable housing gets built. How many do you think in 2 years, how much of this land do you think has been disposed using that legislation, Carl? Make a guess.
3%?
None.
Zero?
Wow.
Yes.
I was close.
Right. Right. So, and the reason is, even when it came to the land bank making the decision, they were not able to do so because the land bank is not the holding entity of that land. It's owned by 10 different agencies, and to create a land transfer from one agency to the other, you needed a resolution, period. And you know where it goes from there. It goes right in the drawers because it's you, private money, that's going to be building that affordable homes, which we think is, there's room for nonprofits, there's room for assigning leverage for 10%. We were the ones that worked with David Thomas at the PHCC and said, if we can leverage the public land and get more Black and brown developers to do it, there is so much we can do with a $4 or $5 billion resource that the city's sitting on. And instead of putting the hard work into it, we're just going to pass a inclusionary zoning legislation that makes jobs don't work.
Okay, let's swing it over to Sandy, and then we'll take audience questions.
So real quick, I do want to say that, and I would not argue that there's much room for improvement in public policy and what the city's doing around land, around development, and probably many other parts of our economic growth here in the city. So I will not argue with that. But I will say that there is a need to balance interests. Much of what I think is going on in City Council is a reaction to what has been less than responsive development activity in our neighborhoods, where people have raised their voice and attempted to work with developers around what you're doing, how you're doing it. Yes, come and respect the existing architecture of our neighborhood. Don't come in with a box that is 2 stories above our 2-story homes with brick facades with something else, because that's disrespectful. That feels like I'm not important, I'm not valued. And so the interests that are coming in, and maybe that's part of the problem, and that's part of also the argument around, or the need for more diversity in the development community, because some of the developers we work with, a lot of what they do, first of all, they come from the neighborhoods, oftentimes North Philly, West Philly. They're familiar with the fabric and culture of those communities. And so it's not a problem to go and sit and talk with community residents, even when they're problematic, about what you're doing, how you're going to do it, how it's going to impact it, how we might alter our plan to be more integrated with what your needs are, what your priorities are. And so part of what, again, the collective is seeking to promote is that there has to be a different approach. And maybe from all sides. Government, yes, needs to learn and understand the dynamics of the industry much better than they do. I think on the developer side, there really does need to be a respect for the communities that you may be seeking to come into when you get outside of Center City. It's already something there. And so how do we work within that? And third, the voices of who's doing the development, as you've said, Mo, does need to change and expand so that we do have a broader array of professionals who are in this arena, who bring different lenses, different understanding, different experiences, different levels of expertise to carry out a different vision to a different end. So I think those are some of the other things we need to think about in terms of responding or reacting to the public policy.
Great, well, thank you. And thank you to the panelists. We're going to throw it out to audience questions in a moment. Be right with you. 2 points I'd like to make in response to what I've been hearing. One is that I say it every chance I get, while the 10-year tax abatement is being scaled back at the end of this year for new residential construction, it will remain in place for rehabilitation. And so as a preservationist, I'm hoping that means that a lot more of the vacant warehouses and factory buildings and outlying neighborhoods will get the benefit of redevelopment, some for affordable housing and certainly other uses. And the second point I want to make is one that Carl made, which is, we spend a lot of time focusing on the city's problems, and boy, do we have them. Opioid epidemic, gun violence epidemic, a shortage of family supporting jobs, so on and so forth. But this still is a great city. We're a growing city again. We just crossed the $1.6 million population, 1.6 million population level again. We fell a little bit behind Phoenix, but that doesn't count because I don't count them as a real city. Apologies to any Arizonans out there. So this is a great city. Parks, restaurants, arts and culture, museums, neighborhoods. We're a magnet for tourists. And let's just keep that in mind as we continue to work to solve all of our city's problems. So, yes.
We have an online question from Martin that's later. What do you see as the next horizon for growth in the development of our city? How do we imagine that might have changed as a result of the pandemic? And does all the new housing growth in city and suburbs represent significant growth in the Philadelphia region?
Are they directing that to anyone in particular?
They are not.
All right, who wants it?
Well, I think we all probably have opinions on where the next areas are. I personally feel that the donut that's in Center City is getting to be a bigger donut, and all of the surrounding neighborhoods are growing. 10 years ago, we didn't have a fish town or Kensington. Bill, you were a donut hole in Center City with Wash West and Market East. University City is seeing growth primarily driven by the universities and life sciences. And we're seeing a brand new 500-unit apartment building at 36th and Lancaster. That would have been unthinkable 10 years ago. So even in the last 10 years, we've seen dramatic growth. We see Point Breeze and Southwest Philadelphia springing back. And so it would be logical to assume that that donut will be getting larger. So Paul, you and I grew up in the Oxford Circle section of Northeast Philadelphia, and I would not be surprised to see new investment, and particularly for workforce housing. I can see where the Restore program and doing one house at a time on a block and mushrooming out from there, where entire blocks of homes that were built in the 1940s and 50s could be modernized. And I think that's what we have to do, because at the end of the day, I'm going to say 10 years from now, we've got to keep our families in the city. We've got to keep them from getting discouraged and moving out because the schools aren't sufficient, because the homes are obsolete. And we're going to get young people because of our universities. We're going to get, we have great restaurants and things to do in town. And we're going to get I believe, retirees and senior citizens and people who want to walk every place and go to the theaters and enjoy the walkability and the parks. But we need to get families to stay and grow in the city, which of course has a lot to do with our school system. But I think that's where we have to aim in the future.
Just to add to that, Paul, I agree with everything that Carl said. I think at National, one of the things that we've concentrated on is not just looking at residential as a singular use, but it really is the creation of communities. And it's the creation of walkable, retail-driven communities. And that's what we try to do at East Market, where we put all the loading, all of the services underground. And there we were able to get sort of all 4 facades of a building at the ground floor level to be activated. And a lot of that has to do with, just the pedestrian activation, but also safety. And I think that a lot of the residential growth and what we're doing at Second Spring Garden is really driven by creating a place. And you've heard the term live, work, play in these sort of 24-hour communities, and that's really what we're after in terms of urban development. And I think that when you talk about residential growth for all the demographic, I think the ability to have this be pedestrian focused communities, particularly in the explosion of growth in University City. And I absolutely agree with Sandra about the contextualization of development within a community. And that's what's special about Philadelphia. I mean, particularly just to pick up on your comment about Philadelphia and Phoenix. I mean, in Phoenix, you can't walk anywhere, and it's 115
Too hot for starters.
Philadelphia has one of the largest residential communities that surrounds a central business district where people don't need cars. And obviously, with the growth of Uber and Lyft and driverless cars, that's just going to only increase. There can be an incredible community that lives in Center City, Philadelphia, that doesn't need a car and can walk or through some other form of transportation, get to where they need to go.
Bill, I think you've made an excellent point about the need to think about residential communities as real places and full, complete shop, live, work, eat in your communities. And I think in Philadelphia, we have the benefit of our public transit system, the L line. That, I grew up the Market Frankfurt L line, and the growth that you see around some of those hubs and moving out west from University City. I live just west of there, but grew up around the 52nd Street and 60th Street L stop. And they were great, vibrant commercial corridors, and therefore the neighborhoods around them were very healthy and kind of complete neighborhoods. And the idea of kind of reviving that and using what I know the latest initiative, I think coming from City Council, is around the Neighborhood Preservation Initiative. I do think that's an opportunity to think more holistically about development, residential, the commercial corridors, how you're investing in your transit system, so that you have that more complete package that's attracting and keeping families. Because people need to be able to get to work. Yes, they do need to have schools for their children, but they also want amenities like green space and recreation. And we have a wonderful system of parks. And it's kind of thinking about how we integrate those different assets we have and real jewels more completely, comprehensively, I think, for neighborhoods. And having as a, we have a master plan for the Navy Yard and Schuylkill Yards. We need a master plan for the 52nd Street corridor and Lancaster Avenue. And so I think taking that same approach to being a multifaceted development in our neighborhoods would be great benefit.
From our live audience, who wants to be the first? I can see you. Okay, ma'am, could you say your name? And if you want to direct it to someone, please say so. If not, it'll be open season.
My name is Stephanie. Wondering what your thoughts on modular housing, how that through help with affordable housing, are you for it, are you against it? What are your thoughts in the whole modular housing?
I'll take that. I think it's modular housing has seen a huge increase in Philadelphia in the past couple of years, and it's been a huge boost for a lot of our neighborhoods, especially the neighborhoods where getting affordable housing has been a problem. As Mo said it earlier, we've got Philadelphia or Baltimore rents and New York construction costs. And that's one mechanism or one lever we can pull to try to bring the cost of construction down. So, the biggest problem with, modular housing is actually getting the boxes from point A to point B. And you can't do it everywhere because of the bridges or the overhead power line. So I think for a lot of areas, it's a tool that everybody can use in order to try to help bring some more affordable housing to our city.
I think it's a tool, but it's not a breakthrough tool. It's sort of, an arrow in your quiver, and you can use it where it's applicable, but mostly what we have in Philadelphia are neighborhoods with existing housing where, it's hard to insert a modular house, on a block where there's other homes, and they're also limited in architectural finishes. They tend to be, boxes and, dimensioned for high productivity, and they don't lend themselves to really customized feel with brick facades and dormers and all the giggles that get added to a house to make it look attractive.
I think a component of modular that is effective, actually, and just having done some work in Europe, though, is like, for instance, in Jefferson's healthcare building, all of the patient rooms, all of the entirety of it is a modular pod. It's made off-site, and it's just put into a framed-out room. Penn First, the same thing. They actually built a warehouse to build the modular units to plug in, where you have this sort of very repetitive feature. I think there's actually more opportunity for that, whether or not it be bathroom pods or kitchen pods or whatever that can go into conventional constructed building. But I think that is, to me, something that'd be more opportunity with that than the actual large-scale use of the modular units in this city.
Okay, I think we have time for at least a couple more questions. Yes, sir, in the back. Oh, Mark, how you doing, Mark?
How you doing there? Good to see you again. First off, I work with RE/MAX affiliates here in the city of Philadelphia, and I also have a very small entity, Tucker Development Plus, which is a development firm. So I have a little bit of a commercial, and then I also want to share some facts. I grew up in Germantown, so I've seen the regentrification, the exodus, and it's returned now. And I've gone to Councilwoman Bass, and I'll just mention her name, we know who the councilwoman is, a couple times to talk about the Germantown High School sites like that. And then we talked about doing numerous things there. And I think one of the things that was mentioned, and it was mentioned very softly and very professionally by the panel, is we got to hold people accountable, and we need to hold the politicians accountable, but we also need to hold the developers accountable. I've been to the BIA meetings, and they've talked about the same issues with all respects for years. We're going to get more Black people and brown people and Hispanic people involved in the trades. We're going to do that, and it's good for them at that time, but it never gets done because they're not held really accountable for doing that. So my point is, I think we need to continue to look at this as a community issue. But with that said, we need to look at it in its totality from start to finish. And the number one thing that keeps people in neighborhoods, especially families, Carl, is schools. If you have quality schools in an area across the country and across the city, families will stay and go there. And if you don't, they're going to have exodus. My son bought his first home, condo, Fairmount, then moved down the street into a house. But as soon as they had 2 children, they were like, hey, wait a minute. And I was the grandfather. Now they're in Jenkintown, and they'll probably go to Germantown Friends School. So we can go and talk about all these issues and have public-private partnerships, but until we sit down and hold everybody accountable at the table and have an initiative and get it going and have some, examples of doing that, it's not going to win. So that's just my 2 bits. I've been here a long time. I've seen a lot of these, and I commend you guys. On another note, just a mini commercial, I am selling 13 acres of land in Jenkintown, which can be developed. So just so you know. Please
We'll
contact
see you
me.
afterwards.
Can I respond to that? Can I respond to
Go
that?
right ahead.
So, BIA, so 1% construction tax, a very unpopular decision and a very unpopular, all development associations were, behind closed doors in the open saying, what the hell are you guys thinking about in terms of BIA supporting the 1% construction tax? And we supported the 1% construction tax because we felt the responsibility, Mr. Tucker, to provide $500 million worth of bond money for affordable housing. 1% construction tax might cost Carl and his building about $5 million. And that is Carl's contribution towards affordable housing, right? That's $5 million. A lot of different associations, a lot of different agencies was against the tax because of the ideology of being against tax. That's not the BIA. BIA is very balanced. When it works, we will support it. When it doesn't work, we don't support it. So 1% construction tax, $500 million, leverage it with public land, and a plan for 12,000 homes that was presented to both the administration and council, that's what the BIA did. No other organization put a plan with bank term sheets to develop all these homes in front of everyone. But again, there are certain things that we cannot do, we cannot overcome. Like you said, softly said, there are things we can't control. We can't control the politics, right? We cannot control a legislation that comes out and says, we want to put all public land in land trusts. Land trust is a very good idea, but put it for 10% or 20% of the land for the city. You don't put all the public land in land trust and say, I'm going to freeze it for 5 years when you have a need to provide 30,000 homes in the next coming 5 years. And that is the balance that I'm talking about. Yes, we have to be held accountable. And that accountability has to come through basically people questioning us on what we have provided and what solutions that we're bringing to the table. And we have plenty of solutions and solutions that actually work. They're not rhetoric, they're actually solutions that work. There are solutions that every politician knows about. It's substantiated with applications and actual projects that are at play and need decisions, right? Now, that's the part that a lot of the people don't know, right? And so, yes, we should be held accountable. Politicians should be held accountable. Administration have to be held accountable. Everyone, because this is a city that has great potential, and we have every ingredient in the mix to make this all solved. It's all solvable.
I just want to make a quick comment on Mark's suggestion here on schools. This has been a problem in Philadelphia for decades, and it probably has the single greatest impact on real estate values and the tax revenues that are not generated for the city because of assessments. If we had better schools, it is estimated by many experts that the values would go up by 20% because families would be here and they'd stay here. It would drive demand. Now, we have many old schools in the city, and Paul, as a preservationist, there's probably a way to do public-private, partnerships, because we have probably 100 schools that are in dire need of rehabilitation and reconstruction. So Paul, put that on your plate. How to leverage historic tax credits and public-private partnerships to get these schools like Germantown back into great working condition.
As a matter of fact, Congressman Emmons has a bill pending in Congress to direct more public funding to rehabilitation of aging schools across the country. And we all need to support that because it really is a great issue or a big problem that needs to be resolved. So we're running out of time. I think we are out of time for more questions. I do want to invite you all back here next week for Mo Rushdy's announcement for Mayor of Philadelphia. But I do want to thank our panelists. We could go on, I think, for the rest of the morning. if we had time. This has been such a insightful and illuminating conversation. I just wish we had a little more time. Let's give them all a round of applause. And it's now my pleasure to introduce the great longtime Executive Director of Center City Proprietors Association, Ben Frank, for closing remarks. Oh, wonderful. Then go right ahead.
Good morning, everybody. It's been a while since I've done the public speaking thing. We all have. I want to thank everybody on the panel again for their participation, and again to Paul for moderating today's event. My name is Kevin Toohey. I'm with D2 Groups. We are, sorry, I'm being directed to the center of the room. We are an architecture firm in King of Prussia, and we're one of today's sponsors. D2 Groups is a creative firm with architecture, interior design, and brand strategy. We also have our own interior in-house MEP engineering. Founded in 2004, we're located in King of Prussia with clients regionally and globally. At D2, we believe everybody's a creative, everybody's a leader, and everybody's a strategist. We believe that with a collaborative and diverse team, we can bring the most energy and the best solutions to your projects. We're proud to be a sponsor of the Meet the Developer series. As a new sponsor, we look forward to being more involved in CCPA and getting to know each and every one of you a little bit better. I've been asked to remind everybody that the next, I think everybody has already, the next Meet the Developer event is December 7th. It'll be another in-person event at Rivers Casino. I want to thank everybody again, thank all of our sponsors, and thank you all for coming out this morning. Look forward to seeing everybody again, and enjoy the networking. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.